Hi, hand readers. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So said William Shakespeare in Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare's phrase is understood to mean that titles do not change anything of the authentic nature of the person in this instance. But can this concept be applied to the various labels and systems of the hand reader's craft? In today's video, we'll explore a little bit about this. I'm Jennifer Hirsch, longtime practitioner, teacher, and author of all things to do with chirology, palmistry, hand reading, by whatever name. Because labels influence the way others perceive us or the work that we do, there are hand readers who actually take umbrage to being relegated into the category of palmistry or palmists. Being a palm reader somehow doesn't have as much perhaps authority or professionalism associated with it for some people as perhaps a term like hand analysis or chirology. Since nomenclature can evoke prejudice, the term palmistry is often associated with charlatanism. So for some practitioners, the labels by which they call themselves do have very great significance, personal significance, but in essence, what relevance do the labels have to our preferred system of how to read hands? Let's begin with chirology. And we also spell it with an E in some instances. I personally have dropped the E. The word comes from the Greek word cheri, meaning hand, and logos, knowledge. And this includes all facets of how it is that the structures of our hands reflect component parts of our psyche. In fact, the art of chirology could be said to embrace the best of traditional palmistry. 5-element chirology is the system that I personally am most steeped in, and this is a branch of chirology that specifically uses the 5-element system called the language of the elements as a way of interpreting people's hands. And what we do is we define the unknown, which is the hand, in terms of the known, which are the principles and characteristics of the elements. 5-element chirology has essentially 3 components. The first is the system, known as the language of the elements. The second has to do with our counseling and coaching, our delivery, how it is that we convey to the client our findings, how well we listen, how we observe. There's a realm within that in itself, that counseling and coaching component. And then the third most significant category, which is as significant as the previous 2 in my humble opinion, and that is that of intuition, intuitive perception, the psychic area of how to read hands. So that's just a very, very brief entree into some of the components of the 5-element system, which is my preferred system. Then we have Caramancy, which is in a sense that third component that I've just mentioned. The term comes from cheri, hand, and mantea, which comes from the Latin word to do with divination, fortune-telling, auguring, prophesying, and describes really the psychic component, again, of the hand-reading craft. So Caramancy is not a system in and of itself, but very much forms part or weaves its way through the art and craft of reading hands, no matter what name you give to the work or the system that you personally are using. Palmistry, of course, is the most widely used term that we all know that defines the art of interpretation, character, past formative influences, potential futures very much. It's very much associated with the whole palmistic world. That is this perception that people have that we can tell their future. And indeed, there are people who are incredibly psychic and are able, through the, let's call it the point of departure of the palms, to somehow have clairvoyant or clairaudient or clairsentient messages of potential future outcomes for people. But that is, again, it ties into chiromancy, but palmistry is just really a generalized term for hand reading. And just like with every other way of reading hands, we're looking at the lines, the skin textures, the shape of the hands, the dermatoglyphics. The thumbs are very key, the mounts are very key in palmistry. Palmistry has a lot more of the astrological symbolism woven into it, as opposed to chirology, which is more fundamentally based on the element principles. However, I forgot to mention earlier that chirology also embraces quite a lot of the astrological symbolism. Then we have the term hand analysis. And those readers who specifically align with this term are perhaps more concerned with the scientific approach to how to read hands, and perhaps also with the association of life lesson and life purpose being a focal point. Hand analysis is an American term. It's a very modern term and very popular, and it does make a distinction between the future, or rather chronologically orientated palmistic approach versus, let's call it, the qualitative approach of reading the person's life situation in the now, and with, as I said, the focus on their life purpose and perhaps on their life lesson. In hand analysis, the interpretation of our fingerprint patterns, our dermatoglyphics, is very, very key. There's an evolved system of ranking of fingerprint patterns, and also I might say that hand analysis in the scientific sense is a rapidly growing field in terms of hand research, often related to health. Psychodiagnostic chirology is a scientific diagnostic discipline that is based on forms and markings on the hands, and it's a system that's applied by professional and behavioral specialists and psychologists. And the idea with psychodiagnostic chirology is that the forms and the features of the hands profile behavioral attributes, syndromes, expressions of the psyche that are apparently very, very accurate, and that can help behavioral specialists and psychologists both to diagnose and treat their patients. In fact, the term, or the, let's say, the system of psychodiagnostic chirology has had a name change. It is now known as the biometric definitions of personality. And again, in the system, the assessment of the fingerprints is quite key. In the world of hand reading, we have another term known as multi-perspective hand reading. And this term really is emphasizing the non-negotiable requirement that the hand is cross-referenced before jumping to any conclusion. In other words, no one marking may ever be read in isolation. It's absolutely vital that the hand is looked at holistically as a whole, or both hands actually, because sometimes they differ and one needs to do this cross-referencing before coming to any conclusions. A primary principle in multi-perspective hand reading is that each individual marking is like a building block that you work on towards your final and most valid assessment. Vedic palmistry. Vedic palmistry is a huge field. There are countless practitioners, of course, from the East, traditionally India. And the term is also known as Hasta Samudrika Shastra. And the glorious metaphor that goes with it is the ocean of signs and symbols in a set of hands. And indeed, sometimes when you look at a set of hands, there is like an ocean or a sky of a constellation of infinite possibilities. You probably know that from a Vedic perspective, these forms and features of our hands, all of these myriad of possibilities, are understood by practitioners who know how to codify and interpret them to fully describe and even determine our karmic future, our karmic destiny. And it's a very powerful and very popular system of hand reading, especially in the East. Other terms that can be woven into our hand reading craft are chirognomy, chiromorphology, and chiromorphognomy. And all of these are specific to the scientific components of the hands, almost like the anatomy of the hand. And they are not really ever going to teach you how to read the hands as such. They are not systems in and of themselves, but it's really about it's nomenclature, it's how to name and identify each component part of a set of hands. And the last term I'll present today is chirogrammeomancy. Again, we've got the mancy, which is the divinatory component, and the grammeo relates to the lines in the hands. So this is the study of identifying and categorizing the lines on the hands and interpreting them, reading into them to see what possibly these formations of lines might reveal. All of these names and definitions for the art, craft, and science of hand reading do interweave with one another. There really can't easily be a definitive point at which one system ends and another begins. No matter how scientific your approach, at the end of the day, the art of reading hands is mystical, it is alchemical. I don't feel that component, this rather let's call it the psychic and intuitive component, can ever be truly separated from one's approach to hand reading. How is it possible? Because we're calibrating each other all the time. We're all doing it, no matter how scientifically minded we are. Does it really matter what we call ourselves? Perhaps what's most relevant lies within the essence of the craft and within the modality's therapeutic and healing applications, and not so much in what it is named. Thank you so much for watching and listening today. I hope you'll click the subscribe button and watch the space for further videos. And if you'd like a reading with me, or if you'd like to study with me, you'll find my info in a moment at the end of this video. Bye for now.